I'm going to say something that might land wrong at first. I want you to sit with it for a second before you react. Your children were never supposed to be your purpose. Not the whole of it, not the center of it. And if they became that, if somewhere in the 20 years of lunches and carpools and homework and worry and love, they quietly became the answer to every question about who you were, then the day they left wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was kind of disappearing. I know that because it happened to me. And I know it because I've heard it from too many people who are sitting where you might be sitting right now, in a house that still smells like your family, staring at a life that technically has everything in it except the thing that made it feel like yours. I want to do something a little different today. I want to write a letter, not to you, not yet, to the version of me from about 15 years ago, the one who was so deep inside the doing of motherhood that she had no idea she was slowly handing herself over. And if you recognize her, if you see yourself in her, I'll step out of the letter and speak to you directly before we're done. Her name was the same as mine. She was 42, and she thought she was fine. So, to her, to that version of me in that particular season. Lesson 1. The confusion of love and purpose. I need you to know something about the thing you're calling purpose. Right now, you believe that loving your children this much, this completely, this constantly, means they are your purpose. The feeling is so strong that it seems like evidence. You love them more than anything. You would do anything. You organize your entire interior life around their well-being. If that isn't purpose, you think, what is? I understand why it feels that way, but here's what I need you to hear. Love and purpose are not the same thing. I remember the morning this started to crack open for me. Years after the season you're in now. I was sitting at the kitchen table. The youngest was already in high school. And someone asked me, just casually, the way people do, what I was interested in. Not as a mother, just as a person. What did I like? What was I curious about? And I sat there. I genuinely sat there and could not answer. Not because I was boring, not because I had no inner life, but because I had outsourced the question of who I was to the role I was playing. The role had answered for me for so long that I had stopped asking. Love your children with everything you have, but don't let the love stand in for the answer to the question of who you are. Those are two separate questions. They are allowed to have two separate answers. If you're watching this, and you're still in the thick of raising them, this is the thing I wish someone had handed me, like a quiet warning note. You can be a completely devoted parent and still be a distinct person. In fact, your children need you to be. They are watching you to learn what a life looks like. Lesson 2. The identity you built around being needed. There is something specific I want you to understand about what being needed does to a person over time. Right now, you are needed. Every single day. Someone needs you to know where the permission slip is, what time practice ends, whether the doctor called back, how the argument with their friend should be handled. You are load-bearing. You know it. It feels like meaning, and it is meaning. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. But there's a version of being needed that becomes something you can't see clearly until it stops. It's the version where the needing becomes the evidence that you exist, where your value to yourself is measured in how much you are required by someone else. I remember the first week after the last one left, not the grief. I expected some version of that. What I didn't expect was the specific confusion of walking into a room and not knowing what I was there for. Not grief exactly, more like a signal with no receiver. I kept starting things and stopping them. I kept reaching for a task that wasn't there. That's not empty nest syndrome, the way people talk about it. That is what happens when your sense of self has been rooted entirely through another person's need for you. When they stop needing you in that particular way, you don't know where to root it anymore. You are more than what you are to them. You existed before they did. There was a person in you before the first one arrived who had preferences and hungers and a particular way of seeing the world. She is still in there. She has been waiting a very long time, and she doesn't need anyone to need her in order to be real. For those of you watching who are in the quiet house right now, if the silence feels like erasure, that is not because you are gone. It's because you were told for a long time that being needed was the same as being. It isn't. You are still here. The question is just who you are when no one is watching. Lesson 3. What you gave away without noticing. I want to be honest with you about something, and I want to say it without making you feel guilty about it, because guilt is not the point. You have been slowly giving yourself away. Not your love, not your time, not your care. Those were gifts, and they were given freely, and they were good. I mean something more specific than that. I mean the version of you that existed before the children, her preferences, her curiosity, the things she was building before the building paused. She got quieter and quieter, and at some point, you stopped being able to hear her. I remember sitting in the car one afternoon, waiting to pick up from practice, and a song came on the radio that I used to love. I mean love. The kind of love that's embarrassing because you know every word, and you knew every word when you were 23, and the song meant something specific about who you thought you'd become. And I sat there in that car, and I felt a grief I couldn't name. Not for the song, for the person who had loved the song. I had given her over so gradually, I hadn't noticed. The things you set down because there wasn't time. The half-finished thing in the drawer. The class you looked at but never registered for. The friendship you let go thin because it required a version of you that didn't fit into the schedule. Those things are still waiting. They are not gone. They are set down, not abandoned. This is not a permission slip to feel guilty. It is a quiet reminder that the person you were before the children arrived is not gone. She is not irrelevant. She is not selfish. She is the person your children saw when they looked at you and learned what a human life looks like. She matters. She is part of this. The things you set down are still there. You are allowed to pick them back up. In fact, I think that is the work. Lesson 4. Purpose isn't assigned, it's remembered. The last thing I want to say to you, and I want to say it slowly, is about purpose itself. I think you believe, the way I believed, that purpose is something that arrives, that you find it, or it finds you, or someone assigns it. And I think that's why the empty nest is so disorienting, because the purpose you had felt assigned. It arrived with the first baby, and it didn't ask your opinion. It was just there, and it was enormous, and it filled everything. What I know now, and what I desperately needed someone to say to me at 42, is this. The purpose that was there before the children was not waiting to be assigned. It was already yours. It was the particular way you cared about things, the particular problems you wanted to solve, the specific kind of beauty that made you stop and look twice. The work, and I mean work in the widest sense, the work of being alive as yourself, that only you were built to do. I remember the morning this came back to me. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a Tuesday, quiet, the house genuinely still for once, and I picked up something I hadn't touched in years. I had been a person who made things, who built things with her hands. And I sat down with it, and I lost track of time for the first time in what felt like a decade. That's what purpose actually feels like, not assignment, recognition. Like meeting a part of yourself that has been waiting patiently for you to have a moment. It doesn't come roaring back. It comes quietly. It taps on the door. You have to be still enough to hear it. And you will be still enough. That's the thing about the empty house. For all of its grief, for all of its silence, it gives you something you haven't had in 20 years. It gives you back the quiet. And the quiet is where she's been waiting. Stepping out of the letter. I know I've been talking to a version of myself, but if you are sitting with this right now, if anything in that letter was addressed to you, I want to step out of it and speak to you directly for a moment. You are not broken for not knowing who you are without this role. You are not ungrateful. You are not selfish. You are not failing at something you were supposed to ace by now. You spent, in some cases, the better part of 2 decades being the person who held everything together. Of course you don't know what you're for when the holding is done. Of course the silence is loud. Of course you reach for tasks that aren't there. That is not pathology. That is physics. An object in motion. The children were not your purpose. They were one of the most profound experiences of your life, and the love you have for them is not diminished by one word of what I just said. But you were here before them. You had a shape before the role gave you one, and that shape, the particular, specific, unrepeatable shape of who you actually are, is still yours. It didn't go anywhere. It just got quiet. Here is what I want to leave you with. The question isn't who you are going to become. That framing puts too much pressure on a person who is still standing in the doorway. The question is just, what do you notice? Not, what should you want? Not what would be impressive to pursue. Not what makes a good answer when someone asks what you're doing now. Just, what do you notice? What makes you stop? What pulls at you quietly? What comes up when no one is telling you what to do? That noticing is the beginning of the thing. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with a plan attached. It is just a small, honest signal from the part of you that has been waiting. You still have time to follow it. Not a grand reinvention, not a second act with a soundtrack, just you, in your particular life, with your particular history, following the quiet pull of your own attention toward the things that are actually yours. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is, actually, everything. If any of this felt like something you needed to hear, I'm glad it found you. There's more on this channel if you want to stay a while. You're in good company here.